consultant with iSolve. We're so appreciative of the opportunity to meet with you all and sponsor this month's roundtable engagement. At iSolve, we help companies manage their most important asset, which you guys know very well, are your people. And that's me right there. So I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of you, if not most of you, but for those of you who I have not met, just introduce myself a little bit further. I have been in the technology industry for nearly 16 years. I have been in the HCM industry for almost 9 and providing iSolve technology for 6. And instead of going into all the stuff about iSolve, I'm going to just give you a quick few points. We've been around since 2010, 2011. We're one of the first technologies that was legitimately born in the cloud. We have over 100,000 customers that utilize some part of our technology. We have over 5 million client employees that touch our technology every single day. So we're actually pretty big. So if you've asked yourself, like, iSolve who? We're actually pretty big. We're national, and all of our technology is our own. But what I did want to reference is what you're seeing here. And so since we're still basically in the middle of the pandemic, COVID-19, I wanted you guys to know that you have tools to support your efforts, even if you're not currently a client of iSolve. So you can go to this web address, which I'll show you in a minute, isolvehcm.com/COVID-19. At iSolve, our priority is to help our customers, but employers in general, manage the COVID-19 situation as effectively as possible. So this website is going to be updated with it's going to be updated regularly with latest information on how employers can manage and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and support their employees through this. And so I'm just going to switch really quick and only take a minute extra and show you guys this resource. Can you see it? Katie, can you nod if you could see this? Okay, great. So you can easily have access to this. Look up at the top left, isolvehcm.com /COVID-19. You have toolkit information about returning to work, customer updates, so everything related to the CARES Act. And sorry if I'm looking left, I just want to make sure I'm speaking to this. CARES Act, PP loan forgiveness, FCRA, how we're here to help you. And then I want to touch on these 2 things really fast, because this is what has been the biggest need from iSolve since COVID started. You're talking about Mojo, so collaboration and engagement tools, communication platform. So think about your remote workforce, upskilling training through LMS. This is all part of our all-in-one technology. Of course, many of you have been exhausted with COBRA initiatives, and so we can streamline that through our technology. It's actually our sister company, Infinisource, that does that. That's actually where iSolve was born. And then a big one that not a lot of people are talking about, and they should be, are people services. So getting the support you need as an HR person to be able to manage the compliance efforts, to be able to learn how to reopen your office or whatever type of industry and environment you're in, to support your employees and stay in compliance and keep everyone safe. So definitely take some time to take a peek at this. I'll make sure Katie gets the information. And thank you again for having me.
All right, thanks so much, Katie. I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us today about iSolve. Now I'm going to kick it over to our speaker today, which is Ron Godier. I've known Ron for about a year, and he's given me a lot of tips and tricks in this last year about recruitment and how to find good salespeople. So, Ron?
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really grateful to the NHRC and to iSolve for having me out this morning. I think it's a really interesting time for people in HR and for people in recruiting, because things are about to change, and they're about to change pretty drastically. And my hope is that we can have a conversation about that. So a couple of things. If you have a question, jump in. Katie's going to help me monitor chat. If you have a question, jump in. I don't want to wait. You can do that, or you can save them till the end. I'm going to do a disclaimer right here at the very beginning. Last night, my computer crashed, and I put this presentation together for you in about an hour and a half this morning. So I'm not going to verify or vouch for the quality of the presentation. Hopefully, it still ends up being to your liking. And so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Ron Godier, and I want to start out today with a thought for you. And it's one that stuck with me for a long time, because it is something that I try to make sure that myself and my clients are always thinking about to not get trapped in ideas about how we always do things. And the quote says, and again, whoops, I just shared the wrong screen. The quote says, with every adversity comes a blessing, because a shock acts as a reminder to oneself that we must not get stale in routine. And that was brought to you by a young man by the name of Bruce Lee, who was somebody I was always extremely fond of. I always thought that a lot of the wisdom that he had got lost, and a lot of the things that he applied to his life got lost because he was in movies, kung fu movies and the like. Quick background about myself. As I said, my name is Ron Godier. I've been doing this about 30 years. And I've worked in a number of different industries, including technology, legal. I've worked in manufacturing, general G&A jobs. I actually started my career as a full desk recruiter in an agency recruiting physicians. I was actually ER doctors for different hospitals around the country. And it taught me the value of relationships. And that's something that I want to share as we go on today. We've done high volume and high impact tasks. I spent 15 years as an independent consultant to companies like HP and DTI and Epic in the legal industry. I also worked for the Department of Homeland Security when we were going through the hiring process in 2000 and had to hire 100,000 folks in 10 months. And currently I am the managing director of a boutique RPO called Hirewerx here in Chicago. I'm also very proud to be a global partner in HackingHR, which if you're not familiar with the organization, I might suggest that you give it a look. It's a very interesting, very thoughtful group founded by a man by the name of Enrique Rubio. There are now that group is about 2.5 years old, something like that. And I believe we have 100,000 participants nationwide or worldwide. And then as Katie asked me to do, I also do a podcast called Talent Unfiltered. You can find it on any place that podcasts are carried, or you can watch it on YouTube. And we try to focus on not just talent, but on things that affect talent, the things around those ideas that affect talent. So let's put everything into context. In December of 2019, the world was a much different place. The World Economic Council had predicted that global growth would be beyond 3.3% globally, which is pretty healthy when you consider really developed countries like the United States and some parts of Europe. Unemployment in the United States was predicted to drop below 3.5% or 3.53%. And last but not least, one of the big concerns was that AI and automation would have the most significant impact on jobs, not only now, but going forward. Let's take a step forward from there to January 19th, 2020. On that day, a 35-year-old man presented in an urgent care clinic in Washington with a 4-day history of coughing and subjective fever. And he was one of the first, if not the first, COVID-19 cases here in the United States. And that's really what happened. And that left a lot of people asking what just happened, right? It's been a very confusing time for all of us. We've seen a lot of different things come our way in a very, very short amount of time. And it hasn't all been COVID related. So let's talk a little bit about where we are today, what our new reality is like. Our economy was artificially interrupted. It was the first time in our history where we made a decision, we're shutting it down. And we did that out of a public health concern, which in my opinion, was probably the right decision, even though it carried consequences for all different sectors of business, all different sectors of our economy. We went from a 50-year low in unemployment to a 72-year high in 30 days. Now that to me it's a stunning number. Right now, even though we had a 2.5% bump in unemployment, we decreased, I think they said 13%. If you look at where those jobs were, most of those were in the service industry. They were in restaurant, hotel, hospitality, as that industry begins to gear up again, okay? The global economy, remember I said they expected it to grow by 3.3%? The global economy is expected to contract more than at any time except the Great Depression. And that's a sobering thought. You need to think about what that means for your business. You need to think about what that means to you in terms of how you live your life, what you do, when you do it. We have civil unrest now on top of all of this. The George Floyd situation, I have my own personal feelings about it. I don't necessarily always share these things, but it was it ignited sharp feelings on both sides of our country, on both sides of the political discourse. And it has created more problems in getting business up and running. It has created animosity between races. It's done a lot of different things to damage our society, and I think that it will be some time before we are able to return to some sense of normal. As of today, we have 112,000 people who have passed from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have a potential reemergence of COVID at the end of the year that we're going to have to deal with. Now, what does all this mean? It's a lot of different things. How does it apply to talent? Well, here's my take on it. For the first time, and this is the most important takeaway for me of this whole situation, for the first time in any time that I can remember, overwhelming candidate preferences and shifts in the workforce towards a gig economy that predate COVID are aligning with how businesses have always responded to recessions, right? As it relates to talent and hiring, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. And this can have huge implications on HR and talent teams in terms of how they find, how they communicate with, how they engage, and how they hire new team members. Now, here are the things that I would say we need to focus on as a group, and I'm going to try to move through this relatively quickly. I'm not going to give you a ton of examples because I'd rather have an open discussion. I think that generally gets you the answers that you're looking for. But here's one of the things that I would say. You need to be prepared to process large amounts of candidates. You are going to be inundated. If you are in talent right now, it is going to be entirely the opposite of what it was before, because all of a sudden we have 40 million people infused into jobs, looking for jobs. And this is going to create challenges in bandwidth and how you get from point A to point B in processing these people, even if they're not a fit for your organization. The second thing, as HR departments and as talent people, we like to have the process. We like to own the process. We want the talent and recruiting process to reside inside of HR. And you remember a minute ago, I said that the preferences and all that stuff were aligning with the way that business generally responds. The reason for that is after recessions, and you can go out and research this independently if you like, companies tend to look at contract workers in greater numbers because they want to be able to scale up and down depending on what's happening with the economy. They don't want to go through what they just went through with having to furlough people and lay them off. The release of a contractor is completely different, right? And I'm using that person as I need them. And I think you're going to see a boom in that business, in HR positions, in technology positions, especially. And you have to ask yourself as an HR leader, how am I going to manage a process that's probably going to be not as much in my control as other things have been? Some organizations may be set up to manage this, but a good number of them are not. You need to think about how you're going to create new, safe work environments for your teams and how that's going to be part of your brand. You need to be able to talk to people about those things. There are going to be a segment of our population that is going to feel like no matter what you say, this is an unsafe environment. I don't know if COVID is gone. I don't know if it's out of the system, particularly through the balance of 2020, because we're not even sure we're going to have a vaccine until sometime later on in the year. We'll touch on this a little bit more as well. And then last but not least, you need to understand that just because there are more candidates in the marketplace doesn't mean that the power in the process has shifted or that it should shift. Candidates having control and having more of a say rather than the company being in the power seat has led to change in how we approach candidates, how we talk to them, and how we engage with them, and the kinds of things that they've come to expect. And I think you should expect that that will continue, and I'll get into that a little bit more as well. So real quick, I want to give you a couple of examples of how to thrive. At the top of this, I talked about managing candidates. And Katie, I don't know if we have any questions or anything. If we do, just throw them in there. But one of the things that you can do is if you have a career portal, you can be thinking about lower cost options to use bots and AI to help move candidates through a process. There are a number of examples out there. There's Olivia by Paradox. There's Aria, there's Zor. There are other things that you can do to increase the bandwidth of an individual recruiter, things like scheduling tools, whether that's Calendly or whatever, and how that tool is used, right? And then there's email automation tools to be able to get to folks if you don't have this built into your ATS already, right? Some ATSs will have it, some will not. But a lot of times recruiters are reluctant to use these things because they change the process, and they also feel like it's eliminating part of their value. And you need to let them know and be able to show them in no uncertain terms how augmenting what they can do makes them better, makes the candidate experience better, which is actually the most important thing that you can do. Now, quick case study. So as an example of technology, my company Hirewerx is a boutique RPO, and we spend a lot of time working on projects with companies of every size. One of the recent ones that we did at the end of last year was with a nationally known insurance provider. And their case was that they had to screen a ton of people all the time, had to have a constant flow of folks. Now, I know that this may not feel directly applicable to what you do, but it is a different way to approach recruiting. So the company needs to hire about 2,000 field sales and CSR team members to meet their growth goals and to compensate for attrition. They had struggled with keeping up with the demand in the market because the jobs they have a high burn rate. There's a lot of attrition. The people who were in the market doing the bulk of the recruiting, which were the field agents, were independent business owners, meaning that legally, the parent company, the corporation, could not provide certain kinds of support to them. They had an internal team of 8 plus field agent recruiting efforts. And they came to us and said, how would you attack this problem? What would you do? And for me, this example is really just a way to get you to think outside the box in terms of the problems that you're going to run into. So what we came up with was we went out and we harvested publicly available data. This is data that you can get. It's data that I can get. It's data that anybody can get. There are tons of providers out there. And depending on how you create the queries, will tell you the quality of the data that you're about to get. We were doing a test for them in 5 markets. We created 17,000 profiles. And our goal, because of the type of job, was to passively recruit as many people as we possibly could. We built passive recruitment marketing campaigns that we delivered via email and text. Over the course of 10 weeks, we sent out 51,000 automated email attempts. Let that sink in for a second. 51,000 automated email attempts. It's a ton of outreach. Was every piece of outreach successful? No. But I'll tell you why this is important a little bit later on. Next, we delivered 5,000 text attempts, okay? And we were able to schedule, in one day, we scheduled 72 interviews from this. Now, what it allowed us to do was to go out and tap markets in places where people weren't always getting approached about these jobs. Another place that we've had someone ask us about this particular solution was in terms of building contact tracing teams, right? To be able to go after people because we understand what the qualifications are and we can go out and readily get that data. Our Hirewerx team outproduced the client team 4-fold, and we only had a team of 2. Okay, so this doesn't mean that you get rid of all your recruiters. It doesn't mean that you completely upend what you've done day in and day out, but it does mean that in this time, this is an example of you having to think outside the box. I think that that's incredibly important because this isn't going to be like any other time that you've had or seen in recent years. I had a friend of mine the other day. I would assume, just by a show of hands real quick, how many of you at your company spend a lot of time on culture, on what it looks like and how it feels, right? We do a lot of that, right? This environment has changed that. And here was his quote: in our current environment, a cool kitchen, a foosball table, and 25 flavors of LaCroix mean nothing. Means absolutely nothing to what we can do. It has nothing to do with anything about the reality of where people are today. And that really struck home to me because we had already begun to think about employer branding in different ways, right? It used to be you could throw some LaCroix out on the table and everybody would think you were cool, right? That's not the case anymore. Today, candidates want certain things. And what my other belief that I want to impress upon you today is that getting outside the box, thinking about this differently, will allow you to understand that this event has the potential to entrench certain candidate behaviors that we saw pre-COVID, but in response to a health concern that some of these folks had. I actually have a team member who I wanted to meet with the other day. He's been tested, I've been tested, everybody's been tested. He refused to come into the office to meet face-to-face. Why? Because he wanted to make sure that he was healthy. He didn't want to carry anything to his family. He didn't want to be exposed to anybody. And that's going to be a concern that could, caveat there, important word, could force people to be thinking about remote work. Katie and I were talking about this, both Katie's and I were talking about this at the beginning, that remote work isn't for everybody. But I think you're going to find that a lot of people and a lot of companies are going to begin to push in that direction. Okay, so where to start? I'm going to go through these a little bit and we can have questions and discuss this when we're done. So implement, it's first step. Figure out the places where you can innovate now for gains later. What are the things that you can do to gain in your talent efforts going forward? So first, implement tech and process improvements to make things easier. And here's an important word, fairer for everybody. One of the things that people learn when they implement a bot or an AI chatbot or whatever the case may be, they find that people actually share more information. There have been studies done on this, actually share more information with a bot than they do with a human, because they assume on the front end that the bot is not judgmental. It also, a bot, generally speaking, doesn't have any of the biases that we might have as a human being. It's a great way to go through screening, and it's a great way to handle mass amounts of applications on the front end. If you're in a company like Kraft, which is one of our clients, you are used to getting 200,000 applications a quarter. If you're in a company of 100 people, you're not going to be ready for 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 applications. And those are the kinds of things that I think are headed your way. Second, and Katie from iSolve talked about this, you need to get good at what we're doing right now. You need to learn how to do this. You need to learn how to interview candidates, because your workforce, I think, is going to get more remote as time goes on. So you need to get good at remote interviewing. You need to get good at remote hiring. And the one that kills everybody, remote onboarding. How do you onboard a candidate? How do you get that person to a place with a laptop where everything works, okay? I have a good buddy, his name's Matt Perry. He works for a company called Peak Six Investments downtown. They are constantly looking for people, and they were one of the companies that kept hiring right through this. Part of that was because they were a technology-based organization. But one of the things that they learned very, very quickly was we had to improve at these skills fast in order to make sure that the things that engage a person in their new job were still present in a remote environment. And so they, not only did they figure out how to onboard, but they figured out how to have community interactions as a company, okay? And then the last one, and Katie from iSolve talked about this, you gotta get good at working remotely, okay? My teams and I, when we're working on something, we get on Zoom like this and we have 4 live cameras and we may not talk for an hour. But if we're working on something collectively together, we will be right there and we'll say, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Figure out new ways to apply these things to what you do day in, day out. This, to me, communicate is extremely important. In tough times, leaders communicate to teams. They talk about the hard things. They talk about the things that people don't actually want to hear. But sometimes leading is I think, at least for me, it's more challenging because I'd like to be able to just talk like this with no thought, no filter, no anything, right? But I think when you're leading, communicating in a lavish way is important. What is also important is understanding how to communicate with candidates, okay? Now, I can't see all of you, but I want you to just raise your hand if this makes sense to you. How many times have you been given a job where there was a timeline on when you had to have it filled, right? And the first thing you did was you reacted and you went out and you emailed a bunch of candidates about this job, right? Anybody do that? Anybody do that? Okay. What happens to that candidate when you do that? They don't know you. They have no idea who you are. They may or may not know your company. And you're walking up to them and going, I got this great job. Why don't you take it? Now, let me ask you a question. I want you to think about this and be honest with yourself. If I met you on the street and I walked up to you and I said, hey, Katie Dykstra, I've got this great widget. Here you go. Buy it. Would you buy it even though you know me? Probably not. And if you don't know me, it's even weirder, right? So I want you to begin to think about your recruiting teams as part of your recruitment marketing engine. It's extremely important. It's what agency people, and I touched on this at the beginning, it's what agency people do well. So how many people in here use agencies? I would assume a good number of you have used an agency in the past, right? You have a job you can't fill, you go out, you call an agency, 2 days later, it looks like the guy, pardon my French, pulled him out of his ass and now he wants $30,000 for you to give him, for him to give you that candidate, right? How does he do that? How does that person do that? Well, they do that because they spend years and years and years developing relationships. They're talking to candidates prior to ever having a job for them. And that's one of the things, because of the things that internal recruiters get hit with, that they don't do very well. So what I would say is think about talking to your recruiters, how they can get out into the market and begin to do 3 things that you do in digital marketing or recruitment marketing. There's a funnel, just like there is a sales funnel, right? There's an awareness level of that funnel. There's an engagement level of that funnel. And then there's a conversion level of that funnel. You need to be anticipating, you need to have your recruiters anticipating the kinds of things that they're going to need going forward so that they can begin to build relationships with people now that you're going to need a year from now, right? But that's a different way of doing it. Most people don't want to put in that time. They don't want to put in that effort, and it's because it takes time. This is where email automation and some of the other things, and repurposing content, taking things that your recruiters do. We used to do this thing called talent snaps, where one of my recruiters would go out and they take their phone, they put it on Snapchat, and they would try to connect with everybody they could that was a recruiter on Snapchat or a technology person on Snapchat. We would search different kinds of hashtags. We would look for different kinds of places on social media where we could connect and be like, real quick, hey, I've got this job. If you're interested, call me at bum, bum, bum. And that was it. It was really simple. And you would be amazed the kind of results that we got out of that. So if you want to discuss that a little bit more, we can. Next, in kind of the write-up of this, we talked about an inclusion challenge we hadn't thought about before. I think it's important that we all understand that there are going to be 2 types of people who come back to work. Those who'd had COVID and resolved, those that did not, right? And if you have, and I want you to be really honest with yourself, get away from everything and just be honest with yourself. If you know somebody got COVID, how do you perceive them? What's the thing that you, is it just, it's unfortunate, right? This is a potential inclusion or exclusionary thing that I don't think people are thinking about. It might sound kind of Fruit Loopy to you, but to me, I think what recruiters do well is they understand human nature. And people tend to look at differences rather than looking at similarities. And I think if you're an HR leader in your company, you need to be thinking about how you're going to handle this situation for those people who had it and resolved, because potentially they could get treated differently. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you have an employee my age. I'm almost 55. I'm in that area where I'm beginning to be at risk for this in a higher number. And I know that there was somebody who was younger that had it. Well, why would I feel safe around them knowing that we don't know what actual immunity is like for this? Would I feel comfortable around them thinking, well, I could accidentally take this back to my family? Because people are deluged with misinformation about what actually happens here. And you need to have a plan to be able to talk about this, to head that off at the pass. And then last but not least, you need to prepare. And this is super important. And this is why the recruitment marketing and the technology and all the other things about candidate preferences, if I were going to do anything, I would spend some time studying what the cohorts in each generation, whether that's Gen X, boomers, because there's a few of us boomers left, and the millennials and the Gen Z people think about. Be prepared for new candidate preferences you've never seen before, ever, as a result of this. People are going to ask for things that they've never asked for, and they're going to be adamant about it because some people out there are super health conscious. They don't trust the government, regardless of which side of the political spectrum they're on. And they're going to say, I need to make sure that I'm doing everything to take care of myself. Also, expect that feelings about remote work, work-life balance, having now worked at home with everybody, and some of the other things that we've seen pre-COVID are going to become more entrenched. I think you're going to see gig work explode. I think this is actually a wonderful thing that's going to come out of this. People are going to say, I don't need to have a job all the time. I can do this. I can work remotely. Sometimes gig work is all about, the fear of it is all about, can I work at home? Can I get these things done? Can I be accountable? And I think you're going to see that people are going to want to do that. And so as talent and HR leaders, you need to be preparing your leadership, your stakeholders, your C-suite for these things, because I truly believe that it's going to happen. I think it's going to be an interesting time. I think that there are going to be a lot of opportunities for people to do different things. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to everybody. I really appreciate the time today. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. And I'm really thankful to Katie and the folks at ISOL for having me out today. And thank you. And with that, I will stop the share. So, yeah.
All right, Ron, we've had a couple questions come through. And again, I wrote one of these questions. I had a question for you. What do you think about LinkedIn and sourcing? Because that's a majority of where we sourced.
You know, it's funny because you're sure this is only for over 18, right?
Yes, I'm sure this is for over 18.
All right. So my opinion is that depending on what you are sourcing for, there are places where LinkedIn makes a lot of sense. If you're a salesperson, you're on LinkedIn all the time. You're constantly looking. You're using Navigator, as a matter of fact, to find leads for your business. I do it, right? I'm constantly going through that. Does that mean that I'm getting candidates? Look at the response rates. Look at the historical response rates. The reason candidates don't talk to you is entirely your fault. Okay, it's entirely your fault. And the reason it's your fault is not because of where you're finding them, it's how you're talking to them. It's what you're saying to them. I'm guilty of it. Everybody is guilty of it. Somebody brings us a job order, our hair's on fire. What's the first thing we do? We go to LinkedIn. Is that really the best place to go for a Ruby developer? Probably not. Probably not. You have to understand who resides where, right? Salespeople, lawyers, accountants are on LinkedIn for sure, but their response rates are still going to be low if you're just hitting them about a job. That's why the recruitment marketing piece of this, Katie, I think is so important, because it allows you to develop a relationship that if all internal teams did that, you'd never have the need to pay an agency fee, except for maybe executive search, because that's a whole different ball of wax, right? But if I'm doing those things and I'm building relationships, I can literally pick up the phone and be, I've got your guy. I'm ready to go, right? That's my take on it. It's a great tool. I love the folks over at LinkedIn. I really do. I have a great rep that I use, and I think she's awesome. She does an amazing job. But the reality is I don't get the results for what I pay, unless I'm, as an RPO, I need 10 contract recruiters who do accounting. In that case, I probably get a lot of results out of that. Does that answer the question?
It does. And then are bots expensive? So a lot of the people that are
Can
on
be.
this call are small to medium-sized companies that don't have the
Sure.
largest budget.
Sure. There are options out there for bots, right? And I think that many of the bots tend to be subscription services. They tend to be, and I'll use an example right now of Olivia from Paradox. I've competed against Olivia because we do a lot of automation. We have partners that do that, and we bring AI bots in. First thing I want to tell you is AI is not AI. Let's get that off the table. These bots are not thinking for themselves. They are great decision tree questions. That's it. Okay. If you don't believe me, go to CVS, to their website. And if anybody's from CVS here, I'm sorry, but go to their website and go through, apply for a job. Just do it. Okay. Apply on your phone and then apply on your computer. And here's the problem that you run into. The bot can't distinguish between a good question and a bad question, and it won't recognize you as a person if you come in on two different platforms, okay? So a lot of it tends to create duplicates. The base question is, are bots expensive? Can be, but there are options out there that allow you to manage costs downward. There are also ways to build a quick bot on your own. If you're a small company, there are ways to build a quick bot on your own. And if you have questions about that to anybody here, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will point you in the direction of the people that I know. There's a product out there called Zor. There's Robot Vera, which is an interviewing. So, I mean, there are thousands of these things. And there's one really interesting one you may want to think about. It's called Wade and Wendy. I believe it is still operative because these things kind of come and go. But the base idea behind it was that Wade was out talking to candidates, not connected to a company, and he was sending candidates to Wendy, the internal bot, when they met a certain qualification, right? Great idea. It was put together by Randstad and some other folks. It's kind of a cool deal. Did that answer the question? I felt like I kind of skipped around there. So.
You did. I mean, a lot of us are not familiar with bots, right? We're still doing
Yeah.
it the old way of how we've always
Sure.
been taught how to recruit. So this is a new way
Sure.
for us to think about things.
I think, let me add one quick thing to that. I think if you're going to think about new ways to recruit, the best thing that you can do is change the communication that you have with candidates. Understand that candidates want to be respected. We work in an industry, one of our verticals is transportation. And in that industry, job hopping, moving from truck drivers is incredible. There's no real loyalty. And when you talk to these guys about why they do that, what you find is that they feel disrespected. Prior to COVID, nobody really understood how integral those guys were to our economy, to what they did. And so I think that lesson carries over everywhere. Talk to your candidates like, here's what I would say. Don't go to LinkedIn and look up what volunteer organizations they're in and try to figure out where they went to school and talk about their college mascot. They're too smart for that. They get that. Talk to them about something that matters. Send them a piece of content that would matter to that person. And just say, hey, I happen to notice you here's how I do it. Happen to notice you and I are connected to some of the same people. I'd like to connect with you. Here's a piece of content that I think might be interesting to you. Boom. So I don't have 30,000 people in my network, but I have 5,000 that I know I can call and be on top of at any given time. We get dissuaded or we get impressed by how many LinkedIn connections we have. It doesn't do anything if you've got 10,000 out of 11,000 that you never talk to. So think about how you talk to candidates. Think about the conversations you're going to have. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Another question that came through from Denise, and I don't know if you want to speak on this, Denise, but you said make sure that you remember companies who must file the OFCCP rules.
Sure. Here's what I would say is that I think that there are always highly regulated industries, right? There are always highly regulated industries. And in every one of those, you can become an expert at what the rules are and build communication strategies around how you're going to interact with certain people, right? You can build a strategy of how you're actually going to recruit that meets what the rules that are in place for you are, but they also are innovative in that space. This is the time to innovate. And by innovation, I don't necessarily mean change the industry. What I do mean is innovate your own environment. Because if you do that now, while the opportunity is here, while the trauma that our economy and other people have felt is fresh, you're going to have an opportunity to build things that are long lasting and pay dividends down the road. So I don't know if that actually answered your question, but I always think there's a strategy. I always think there's a way to get this done.
Mike ended up sending in a comment, and Mike, again, feel free to ask it yourself if you'd like. He just wants to know, how do you keep biases out of technology and bots when you're directed/programmed by people?
Yeah, interesting, because bots are still susceptible to bias, okay? And I think when you if you go through the process with a company like Zor, or you go through with Olivia or Aria, you go through an entire process where you are asking questions, right? You are building decision trees for the machine. And it is imperative that you understand and have experts around you that can say, well, that could be interpreted this way. I understand what diversity is, but I'm not necessarily an expert in it, right? And so I always try to surround myself with those folks to say, could someone take this question in a way that could be considered exclusionary, right? I always try to think about that. It's a really good question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for it. What I will tell you is that there are a lot of technologies out there that literally scrub a profile down to the actual skills, and they remove pictures, they remove names, they remove everything, because inadvertently we all have some level of bias. That's just the reality. I hate to say it, I know it sounds horrible, but it is just the real thing, is that we look at things as humans. We are trained to notice certain things that are different, right? Our bodies genetically were built like that. And it takes a conscious effort not to do that. So the more things that you can do to eliminate any bias, the better off you are. But I would consult with people about how you structure your questions. I would talk about how you use pronouns, right? How you use pronouns in questions, I think is something, because diversity isn't just minorities. It's male, female, orientation, religion. It's all of these other things. And you need to think about that as you move forward. I'm sorry, that's probably not a great answer, Mike. I apologize.
Ron, you keep saying that, but you're giving good tips and tricks here.
Yeah, but I mean, I just, I like to answer questions completely. I'm a consultant, so we want to make sure we have the answer, right? And it doesn't always play out that way. And sometimes you just have to be, I don't really know. So, yeah.
All right, so the last question that's in chat, and then we can open up that anybody can speak.
Sure.
What do you think will be more important when trying to recruit passive candidates in the COVID world? Meaning, during an uncertain time, are there specific benefits that you think candidates would be expecting to engage in conversation?
Wow, great question. That is so hard to answer. And the reason it's hard to answer is because what I've noticed about candidates is that there are consistencies by demographic. There are consistencies by generation, right? People talk all the time. People my age and older talk all the time, the millennials, right? Well, what they never understand is that the millennials have been through 2 recessions, a pandemic, race riots. They are the most challenged generation since the people who came out of the Great Depression. So you have to understand the things that are going to motivate those kinds of people. And some of those feelings that they had and Gen Z had are going to be entrenched. What I will tell you is that people are really, truly embracing individuality. And so what works for one person in a general term might work for somebody else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will. What I would say is flexibility is probably one of the big things. I would say that a culture that respects safety. Safety as an employer or as an employee for the employee. I think that there are going to be opportunities for people. People may go, I'm willing to take less money if I have flexibility, right? I'm willing to do certain things if I have the flexibility to live the way that I want to live. And that's why I think the gig economy has an opportunity to boom, right? The gig economy truly has an opportunity to boom now. And it has that because people are going to go, you know what? I just went through a pandemic. 110,000 people died. I'm going to Europe because I don't know if I'm ever going to get a chance to do that again. And I think as we've grown from boomers to millennials to Gen X and Gen Z and all the way down the line, you've seen shifts away from I'm going to retire here to I might work this job for 5 weeks and then I'm done and then I'm going backpacking, right? That's the new norm. And the challenge is really going to be on how companies address that, how they parse out work and how they think about work, I think is going to be the big thing. And those companies that are forward thinking in terms of how they view employees' safety, well-being, wellness programs, health benefits, I think this could also force our government to think about health benefits much differently, which to me, the more we can do. I know people bitch all the time about, I don't want a European socialist medicine, but the reality is that if you look at the mortality rates of us versus every other civilized country out there that has a socialized medicine program, our mortality rate is far higher because we stress, we do nothing for preventative, we don't do any of those things. So I think that there's an opportunity for some real change here. And I hope that you guys come up with better answers to these questions than I did. So with that, if anybody else has any questions, I'm more than willing to stick around for a while.
Let's open the floor. Who's got questions you'd like to ask Ron, or if you guys just want to talk about a certain topic that's on your mind?
And crickets filled the room.
They say as a salesperson, you should sing the alphabet in your head and not talk. And then someone will get that uncomfortable that they'll speak up.
And I just did. That was beautiful, right? It was a living lesson.
This is Mike Lopresti.
Hey, Mike.
I'm on the staffing, I guess, contract side, and similar to you, we're expecting, that boom. Do you think that's like a 3 to 6 month plan, or do you think it's the cliche term, but new norm, like it's going to stay that way, or do you think it's just more to get through, until there is kind of more of a cure or things like that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That's a great question, Mike. I think it's really interesting, and props to you for being in the hard business. It's hard to be outside as a vendor because nobody wants to talk to us anymore. They all think we're here to sell them something, and that's not always the case. But what I will say to that is that I think it could be a mix of both. Okay, I think as Canada preferences change, I think the gig economy is going to become even more entrenched. There's a man out there, some of you may know him, is a guy by the name of Wade Burgess. Wade was the former VP of Talent Solutions at LinkedIn. He ran a company in Chicago called ShiftGig. And I first met Wade when he was speaking to a STAR conference downtown about the gig economy and what was going to happen. And he was a firm believer at that time, this was 2 or 3 years ago, that the gig economy was going to be the norm at some point. To your question specifically, I think that forward-thinking companies who can figure out how to do this will gravitate to that much more quickly, which means that contract work, gig work will increase, I think, over time. The question will be, how do those resources engage with companies? Will they do it through something like Fiverr or Uptake, where you just go out and you go, hey, I need a Ruby developer for this 10-week project, right? So for companies like ours, Mike, that may be that we have a portal of available talent, right? And we become an agent, we're representing. And because we're doing it that way, there's a tax liability if those people are 1099s, right? You need to think about that as well. If they're a 1099, you're on the hook for the taxes, and so is the client if the person decides not to pay, right? So there may be a shift in how that happens and when that happens and how those people are classified. But I think that ultimately you're going to see gig economy workers have their own benefits plans. They're going to have their own ways of being able to have different agents out there working for them all the time. And the question is, what will you do, Mike, to attract those folks to your business? In the short term, companies infrastructurally are not ready to do that. They can't. A company, Kraft, okay? Kraft has said, we're not bringing anybody back to the office until at least October or November, right? Because they're in the Aon building downtown. Aon controls what happens there, and Aon saying we're not coming back till next year, right? But they're not structurally ready to have all of their IT work done by 5 different gig workers because they feel that there's gaps in continuity or there's gaps in knowledge, right, of people jumping in. So I'm not sure that that's a good answer to your question. I think you're going to see a boom sometime towards the third quarter, maybe end of the third quarter of this year. Companies are going to begin to start to want to ramp up again. Unfortunately, I think that coincides with a potential reemergence of COVID, and so I don't know what happens in that place, and I think it's almost impossible to predict. You can look at the economic indicators, and you can find good news or bad news depending on which one you look at, right? But we have historic unemployment. Companies aren't going to sit idle forever. At some point, they're going to have to make money. And part of how they do that is technology and having accounting people. And I have a client who 2 weeks prior to March 21st, when the lockdown went into effect, said, oh, we're going to be fine. Everything's going to be great, right? The guy that was my contact there was the director of talent. 2 weeks later, he was furloughed. He was gone, along with 2/3 of their workforce. And that happened in 2 weeks. And I don't know if that particular client ever makes it back. I don't know what that looks like, right? So, I think you could have interim HR. I think you could have interim directors of TA. I mean, I think it's all there for the taking. The question is, what are we as professionals going to do to make it attractive to business owners for them to say, this makes sense, right? This is the time. Why am I going to work with Mike and not Ron? Or why am I going to work with Ron and not Mike, right? So, does that answer your question at all?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right, super. I see one from Tara. I'm curious what recruitment marketing techniques participants are finding most helpful or successful to them lately. Does anybody have any recruitment marketing things that they'd like to share about what they've worked on? Okay, Tara, I'm going to go because I can't stand the silence. It just kills me. So one of the things that I found that during this time we've spent a lot of time as a company doing is pipelining candidates, talking to them about what actually matters to them. Not because we don't have open roles, and I'm assuming a lot of you, hiring is on freeze right now. You're not ready to do anything in many cases. Maybe some of you are, if you have, technology seems to keep moving forward, and every company is really a technology company now. But ultimately, I think that we've spent a lot of time talking to people in different industries that we service. So that might be G&A roles, that might be manufacturing. It's a lot in transportation right now. And it is talking to them about opportunities to do what it is they want to do in a perfect world. And the kinds of conversations and the kinds of relationships that we've been able to generate in a very short amount of time just from taking that approach. Not talking to them about a job, not hammering them, I've got this great job, come take it, right? Just saying, hey, the world is different. What do you want to do? How do you want to talk about it? And that means you have to think about how you're going to get in touch with those people. So here's a little hack for those of you. Does anybody here work in industries where a lot of your candidate population is on Facebook? Okay, I would assume some of you do, all right? I want you to go out and I want you to research this, and you're going to find out it's one of the little tricks that we use. So in every Facebook ID, at the end of it, the very end, the last slash is the username, right? In more than 80% of those cases, people use their email address as a way to designate it because they can remember it. They'll just sign in. They don't go to the trouble of creating a unique ID. Some people do, but not everybody. If you can figure out how to do this, and we did it, write a script to parse that string, right? To get that name, and then you write a concatenation script. And if you're in technology, you know what I mean. You're writing a concatenation script to create email addresses across the 5 major, most popular that have like 85% of these. So we did this. It's Gmail, Outlook, or Microsoft, AOL, surprisingly, which I didn't even think AOL was still around, Yahoo, and Comcast, right? And so we wrote the script, and then we concatenated, and we created 50,000 email possibilities in 10 minutes because we were able to pull and use different tools. And I'll give you the tool's name. It's called Phantom Buster. Go try it. It's amazing. There's a free version. You can really pull down 10,000 profiles at any given time. You can do it by group. Generally, what we do is we search groups. Then we concatenated and we ran it through another tool. Here's another one for you called Kickbox. Kickbox verifies email addresses. And from that 50,000 or original 10,000, we were able to verify 9,000 email addresses of people that we knew. And then we created a recruitment marketing program for them that had nothing to do with a job. It was just, how are you handling this? Here's what's going on in your industry because of COVID. Here's what's happening. The responses we got were amazing. And those are some of the techniques that we've been able to use. So Kickbox and Phantom Buster, give them a shot. If you want to spend money. Yeah,
Thanks,
it's
Ron.
good stuff, man. You're welcome. You're welcome. I think we're almost done, right?
We are. So wanted to let everybody know we are recording this. We will be sending out a YouTube channel that we've been now recording 2 sessions of this so that you'll have access to see any of the recordings previously and going forward. The other thing is you'll be getting CE credit. So we'll be sending an email to you guys with Ron's PowerPoint deck, Ron's contact information, and Katie's contact information. And then I wanted to turn it over to Phil in a second, but I want to let you guys know about the next 2 roundtables that are coming up. So we do have one that's going to be in July, and I talked about this at the last roundtable. It's going to be Kim Brown speaking, and she's going to be talking about innovation from a remote status. So how do you get innovative now that you're working from home, and how do you still connect with people and do your business differently? And then in August, we're looking for a speaker right now to talk about what's going on in the world right now with Black Lives Matter. I think it's an important discussion of how HR professionals can start to think outside the box with diversity and inclusion. So I want to thank Ron for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Phil to speak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I won't take too much of everyone's time, but on behalf of NHRC, I want to thank Ron, our presenter today, for all his great points of view and for the conversation. And to ISOL, to Katie Bergansky for sponsoring us today. And of course to Katie Dijkstra and Denise DeLisle, our program directors, for setting up this fantastic session.